Welcome everyone. This is the second WMS Acquisitions Best Practices session. We thought this topic, rolling over your budget, would be a useful thing right now as many libraries are getting ready to end their fiscal year, or at least for those of you whose year runs from July to June. But even if your budget period's on a calendar year or other time period, you can still use the steps in this presentation to roll over your budget to the new budget period. So the process of rolling over your budget consists of two parts. First, you'll need to set up the budget for the next fiscal year. You can copy the budget structure or the structure and the fund amounts from your current budget. Or if you anticipate making many changes from your current budget, you can create a new budget structure. And just like when you created your first budget, the new budget is not saved until you create the first fund. After you create the new budget, and the last day of the current budget has passed, you'll be able to close your current budget. So those are the two main steps you'll need to take to roll over your budget. In addition, there's some optional steps that you can take depending on if you want to resolve any outstanding transactions on your current budget rather than rolling them over to the new budget. We'll go through the steps to find these transactions so that you can expend the funds on your current budget. But in order to roll over your budget, this is completely optional since you can map these transactions over to your new budget. So the first step then is to set up the budget for the next fiscal period. So in setting up the new budget, you'll want to do some planning and consider the following. First of all, decide on your start and end dates. Note that the start date will be the day after the end date of your current budget, but you can edit the end date or adjust the end date of your current budget. Second, decide if you want to copy the budget structure or start from scratch. If you decide to copy the budget structure, you'll be able to make changes to it. However, you cannot move a fund to a different parent fund. You'd have to delete it and then create it again under the parent fund you'd like to move it to. If you're not copying the structure, you would just start creating it from scratch as you did when you created the first budget. Thirdly, decide if you want to copy budgeted amounts. If your budgeted amounts will be exactly the same for the new budget, then it makes sense to copy these. The advantage to copying them is that if some are the same, then you don't have to add them manually. But the disadvantage is you won't have a good way to track which budgeted amounts you've changed and which you have not. The changes you make are saved, but there is no tracking of the changes. So if you don't copy the budgeted amount, you can see that the budgeted amount has not been modified because it will be $0. The next thing is to decide if you want to copy disabled funds. So this would include funds that you've disabled because you no longer want to use them on transactions, but also funds that are disabled if you're using them as container funds. And then finally, make a note of any changes that you want to make to the structure and the fund amounts. So to create the new budget for the next fiscal period, first I would click on Budgets in the left navigation and then click on New Budget. And on the New Budget screen, note that the status says New and the start date, 7/1/22, is automatically populated with the day after the last day of my current budget. So I'll first select the budget period. So I'm going to click on the period drop-down, and then I'm going to select 1 year. The other options, again, are 2 years or 6 months. And now you can see my end date has changed to 6/30/23. Now, if I decided not to copy the budget structure, I could start creating my budget from scratch, as I did in creating my first budget by clicking on the green circle in the Actions column. I would then just start adding funds. But if you're going to keep basically the same structure, it'd be best to copy the budget structure from the current year's budget. And then, as I said, you'll still be able to make additions and changes to it after that. So I'll click Copy Budget Structure. And then I have 3 options on the Copy Budget Structure dialog. I can select Copy Funds with budgeted amounts. So if you copy budgeted amount, it will be the same for the new budget. But as I said, if you need to make changes to the amounts for the new budget, keep in mind you won't have a good way to track which budgeted amounts you've changed and which you have not. The next option says, do not copy funds disabled for new transactions. and their child funds, and do not copy funds disabled for all uses and their child funds. For my budget, I don't have any disabled funds for new transactions, but you could select this if you want to remove this fund from the new budget. And I want to continue to use my top-level funds as container funds as I did with my current budget and have them set to disabled for all uses. So I do want to have them copied over to the new budget since I'm keeping the same structure. So I'm going to leave these both unchecked. And I've just checked the top option, copy funds with budgeted amounts. And then I'll click on copy. And the system confirms budget structure copied. And now you can see the copied structure and the fund amounts. So I'm going to scroll down. And let's say I want to edit the budgeted amount for the e-cereals fund. So I can click on the ellipsis at the end of the row there. And then I would click edit. And then let's say I'm going to change the amount for this fund from $5,000 to $10,000. And then I'll click save. And you could continue to make other edits as you need. Next, you have the option to enable the new budget for use right away by clicking the checkbox at the top. Now, if you do this before you close your current budget, you'll see both budget periods will be available for use or bookable. If you don't want both budgets to be available or bookable, you should leave Enable for Use unchecked. And when you close your current budget, this new budget will automatically become enabled. I'm going to enable the new budget so I can show you how both budgets will then appear on orders and invoices. So the system says you're about to make the budget period bookable. Do you want to continue? And I'll click OK. And you can now see the budget state has changed to bookable. So if I looked at an order or invoice now, I'd see both the current and the new bookable budget are available. If I don't enable the new budget, you would see just the option to select the current budget on transactions. Next, you can optionally resolve transactions on your current budget before closing it. You can also skip these steps if you want to map all of your open transactions to the new budget. But I'll go through these steps to show you how to find these open transactions in case you want to resolve them using the current budget before closing it. So if you want to resolve open transactions before closing your budget, you'll want to consider first, do you have unpaid invoices that you want to pay on the current budget? You might at least want to review these as you've already created and added items to these open invoices and maybe were intending to pay them on the current budget. Second, are there encumbered items that you want to pay on the current budget? And third, do you have unpaid plan items that you want to pay on the current budget? I'll go over each of these and then I'll show the steps to close the current budget. So first, define unpaid invoices. Unpaid invoices will have the status of open, ready for payment, or awaiting payment. The amounts on these invoices may be encumbered amounts if they're from orders that have been placed, or they may be non-encumbered amounts that have been added directly to an invoice for local or non-bibliographic resources or plan items that you may have added to an invoice. Fund amounts for plan items are not encumbered. In any case, when you pay these invoices, the fund amounts will move either from the encumbered amounts for the placed orders or from the remaining balance for the fund for any non-encumbered items to the expended amounts for the fund. To find unpaid invoices so that you can pay them on the current budget, go to Invoices on the left navigation, and then filter by payment status, open, ready for payment, and awaiting payment. That is, select everything except paid. And from the results screen, you can select one of these invoices by clicking on the invoice number, and then you can edit the invoice as needed and pay the invoice to expend the funds from the current budget. Next, you may want to find items that are still encumbered on your current budget. Funds are encumbered when an order is placed, and as mentioned previously, these funds will be expended when added to an invoice and the invoice is paid. So there's two ways to find encumbered items. First, you can find them by filtering order items, or you can find them from the encumbered items column in your current budget. So I'll take a look at both of these. First, you can find encumbered items by clicking Orders and then Order Items on the left navigation. and then filter by order type, purchase order, order status, ordered, and I've also added cancellation requested since these items may still have encumbered funds. And for the purchase status, I want items not paid. So I've selected everything except paid for the purchase status. So using these filters, I found 13 items with encumbered amounts. This would include items from all funds. Note, however, that unpaid order items might not be encumbering money on the fund if the price for the item is 0. So you can see here that I have one item with an amount of 0 for the encumbrance. To further filter to just unpaid order items with a positive encumbrance, you can use the encumbrance filter. So on the encumbrance filter, I'd enter more than 0, then I'd click apply. And then you can see that I have just 12 items and they all have an encumbered amount more than 0. The second way to find encumbered items is by going to your current budget. So looking at the encumbered column, you can see the total encumbered amounts for a particular fund. So for example, I see that I have an amount of $303.33 encumbered on my Books General Fund with the fund code B2. I can click on the amount, $303.33, and this takes me to the Order Items screen with the search for the encumbered items for fund code B2 already executed. And with the filters, Order Status, Order Type, and Purchase Status already selected. And these are the same filters that I use to do a manual search of encumbered order items. But the difference is this also limits the search to just items using fund code B2. It looks like 10 of my encumbered items were from my Books General Fund with the fund code B2. From this screen, you can also see the purchase status column that although none of these items are paid, some have been invoiced, meaning they've been added to an invoice, but the invoice is not paid. So you could filter by not invoiced to know which items need to be added to an invoice first and then paid. You can also download this page using the download icon if that might be helpful in finding these items. Then I would need to go back to my budget and repeat these steps for any other funds with encumbered amounts. Finally, you'll need to invoice these unpaid order items and pay the invoice in order to expend these amounts from the current budget and resolve the open encumbrances. To do this, go to the Receive an Invoice screen. Here you can either receive and invoice the items at the same time, or if you've already received them, you can just add them to an invoice and finally pay the invoice. I won't go through all the steps here, but we have very detailed instructions in our help documentation on invoicing. Finally, you may want to find unpaid plan items and pay for them from your current budget. Plan items will have the order status placed or ordered when the plan is created, so funds are not encumbered. Fund amounts will be expended for these items directly from the remaining balance for the fund when you pay the invoice. You can find plan items by filtering by the order type, for example, approval plan, or any other plan type you might use, by the order status ordered or placed, and by the purchase status not paid. So again, I'd go to orders and then order items. And then I'd select the filters order type, approval, or other plan that you use. And then you can select all plan types that you might use at the same time, or you could select one by one as I have here. And for the purchase status, I'd select everything except paid. And so I found 4 approval plan items which have not been paid. And it looks like these are all on the same approval plan, fiction approvals, and none have been added to an invoice, although I've received 3 of the 4 items. So if I want to expend the funds for these on my current budget, I'd again go to receive an invoice and add them to an invoice and pay the invoice. So now I've gone through all the ways to expend funds from the current budget before you close it, if you choose to do that, rather than mapping these transactions over to your new budget. So once you've created the new budget for the next fiscal year and you've decided how to handle any open transactions from the current budget, you can then close your current budget. Now for this presentation, I did not resolve my open transactions since I want to show you the process of mapping them over to the new budget. So a few things to know about closing the budget. First of all, the end date of the budget must have passed. Closing the budget does not roll over subscriptions. They must be renewed. And the following will be moved over to the new budget. So order items with encumbrances, unpaid or partially paid plan items, unpaid invoice items, and order item templates. Note that the default mapping to the new budget is based on fund code. Also note that you cannot make changes to a closed budget. So that means you cannot unpay or make changes to invoices on a closed budget, although you can change the fund for a paid order item on a closed budget if you want. So to close the budget, I'll select Budgets, and then I'll click the drop-down, and I'll select my current budget, and then I would click Edit. And then on the top right side of the screen, I'll click Close Budget. And a dialog box opens that says, to close a budget, you must reassign all unpaid items and templates that use this budget to the next budget. The list below includes all funds from this budget that are used by either an unpaid item, an order or invoice, or an order item template. To see the full list of items, I can page through, or I can change the rows from 5 per page to 10. And now I can see all the 8 rows of these items. Now, since I copied the budget structure to my new budget and I didn't change any of the fund names or codes, the system is going to map to the same funds in my new budget. Remember, the fund code is the primary match point for mapping. But if I want to make a change, I can still click the drop-down. For example, I'll click the Books General Fund, and I could select another fund from the new budget to map to. Note that when filling out the Close Budget Mapping dialog, your changes are saved automatically. So you can do this in multiple sessions, which you may want to do if you have an especially long list of items to review and map. Finally, when I'm finished with the mapping, I'm ready to close the budget, so I'll click on Close Budget. And the system responds, you're about to move all open transactions from the budget 21-22 to the budget 22-23 and close the budget. This will make the budget 21-22 unavailable for further ordering and invoicing. This action cannot be undone. Are you sure you want to close the budget? And as I said, please be sure that you're ready to close the budget, taking care of any transactions you want to resolve, since once you close the budget, you cannot undo this. So if I'm ready, I'll click on OK. And then the system says Close Budget is running. Now this may take a while, so you may want to do this at the end of your day. When it's finished, the budget is closed, and you can see the state has changed from current to closed. So to summarize, to roll over your budget, you'll first have to set up the budget for the next fiscal period. Then you'll need to decide if you want to resolve transactions on the current budget, which, as we said, is optional since you can roll these over to the new budget. And then after the last day of the current budget period has passed, you can close the budget and start using the new budget for ordering and invoicing.
If you have questions, please go to help.oclc.org and click Contact OCLC Support on the top right for contact information for support in your region.